We're back online. Welcome back, everyone. We had a wonderful lunch here. I hope you had a good break at home. We went through Major Arcanums 1 through 4, which took us through the 4 steps in magic, and now we're moving on to the Hierophant. The Hierophant is also known as the Pope. The 5th Major Arcanum in Egyptian Tarot, he is lucky because he corresponds to Jupiter and represents the pentagram, or the head and limbs of a human form. This image is shown here in the Vitruvian Man in the upper right-hand corner of the slide. So we have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as symbolized by all the limbs of a human form. I'm standing like Vitruvian Man now.
Did you say 5?
5, 1, 2, 3, and then the 2 legs.
The head.
Yeah. This image is shown here by Leonardo da Vinci. That's his piece of work. The Pope took over for Pontificus Maximum, head priest of the Roman pagan tradition. The Hierophant was the high priest who overlooked initiation rites of the Egyptian mystery school. The key words for this card are religion, law, values, ethics, faith, and charity. He is a symbol of man striving to connect with the divine. Because this card is ruled by Jupiter astrologically, it symbolizes abundance, goodwill, generosity, benevolence, joviality, and the religious urges of the soul. All of these as well could be used to interpret this card should it come up in a reading. The 2 genies at his feet represent the presence of both good and evil influences in our lives. And it is by the Hierophant's power of discernment that he can focus his attention on cosmic welfare. Discernment means distinguishing or recognizing between what is good for us and what is not good for us. And believe me, there are a lot of people who have difficulty doing that in some areas of their lives. A partial symbol of the pentagram is seen in his blessing. And he shows his hand. He does it right-handed, but he shows his hand like this, with 3 fingers up. His 3 fingers represent his head and arms reaching towards devotion. The pentagram upside down represents the black magician. In a position of obstacle, the Hierophant could represent misdirected religious fervor in orthodox dogma or other causes, groups or ideologies. Anything that might get one on a soapbox, if you see it in an obstacle. That would be the negative side to the card.
Where are you seeing the reverse pentagram now?
Well, there isn't a reverse pentagram in that one. I'm just pointing out that later on in the Magician, we will see the reverse. In the Black Magician, we will see the reverse pentagram. But right now, we're seeing his blessing, which is actually, he's doing this. It's kind of hard to see, but represents the head and the 2 arms pointing up, which would be a blessing, a sign of blessing.
Is that called a yantra? Or a mantra? A yantra, I think, is a hand position.
Well, it could be. I don't know what this particular position means.
Mudra.
Mudra. Many people don't think about what they are creating as a result of their belief systems. People have used their beliefs and been driven by them to hurt and murder those with different beliefs. It can be over different beliefs about economics, race, religion, you name it, and people will kill over it. How much horror has been inflicted in the name of God, country, or tribe? We may not go as far as murder, but do we ever ask ourselves if our beliefs help to further manifest love or inhibit love? Do our beliefs breed anger, hatred, and harm, or tranquility, love, and healing? Do they make for a better life or a worse life? Do they make for a better world for others or a worse world? The primary culprit in our belief that the primary culprit is our belief that we are separate from each other and from God. Not one being manifesting itself in many forms. We are all one being manifesting itself in many forms. This separateness then spawns differences and selfishness, the very meaning of the black magician. So, let's have a look at these cards. Our Hierophant over here also has two, they're not genies, they're priests. And I've seen in some decks where one priest, I don't know if y'all remember, if you have this card in your deck, where one priest is sort of looking over his shoulder. Have you seen that one?
I've seen that.
So there's one that prays in devotion, and there's another one that sort of looks over his shoulder like, I'm really not buying into anything.
Or else I'm looking at how I can get higher up.
Exactly. Exactly. So it shows a little, a little duality in the card. Just as the genies over here, we have one wearing black and one wearing red, which would symbolize the same type of duality, where one is loyal and the other one's maybe just trying to be loyal. Or it also symbolizes discerning between what is good for us and what is not good for us, and what is good for all sentient beings and what is not good for all sentient beings, and that ability to discern. Yes, Janet?
What are the little critters up above his head, to the far right and the far left of that ledge? What are those little critters?
These up here,
Yeah,
they're snakes.
they're snakes.
I think they're snake heads. Let me look real closely. Yeah, they're little asps.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Like they're cute or something.
We have the winged orb here, which is the sign of the soul being soaring to spirit.
Actually, I think that's a yantra. The
It is
visual
a-
symbols
yeah.
are yantras.
Yes.
The mantras are oral, and
Yeah.
the mudras are the hand positions.
Right. I think you've got that right this time. Uh-huh. Again, we see this apron thing going on. And I think that's just really the dress of the priests and the pharaohs.
What about the two keys?
And the center one here is called the high priest. And this is a highly modernized version of this card. And it just shows a pyramid, of course, which we know that represents spirit, right? Spirituality. And on top of the pyramid, we have an orb, which also represents spirituality. And wholeness and oneness and God. This looks like a little buckle here, too, that might be sort of a yoni.
Sun, moon.
It could be a symbolism of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Any questions about this card before I move on?
Those two keys? The two keys on the Hierophant card?
The two kings?
Below.
Keys. K-E-Y-S, keys.
Oh, I'm glad you pointed that out, Margie. Yeah, these are the two keys. Now, it's interesting because these keys in our tradition represent the golden key of astrology and the silver key of tarot. But that sign was taken over by Christianity to represent the Pope. It's a papal sign now. And that's why when you go into Catholic churches especially, you'll see these keys in the windows, in their glass windows. I used to look at them, I remember as a kid, and say, why are those keys up there? Of course, nobody could ever answer my question, which is...
Your keys to the castle.
Yeah, the keys to the castle. But no, that's what we call a papal sign now. And, and he's often called the Pope in many decks. Okay, let's go on to the next one. I'm going to try to get through as many here. What did I do there? 2 paths.
It really means holding the keys to the true knowledge.
That's another thing. Yeah, that's how the Catholics, I think, portray those keys, that they hold the
But I mean, but originally too.
originally
It's
too.
not that what they're trying to say is that Pope is the only one
That's right. He's the infallible.
So they've taken it away from that. Everybody has access to that knowledge. That's what the keys represent in any case.
That's right. The keys is the key to soul progression. is astrology and tarot, as tarot is a reflection of astrology. Okay, and now we're going to go on to the two paths, which in most decks is called the Lovers. It's also called temptation, choice, and dilemma. And all of those words could be used in interpreting this card, should you see it in a spread. In most cases, this card does involve a love interest situation. When it turns up, it's usually a love interest card. The two paths makes it clear that this young man is standing at a crossroads, trying to decide if he should give his heart to the woman on his left or the woman on his right. In many decks today, only the naked lady remains. One lady or woman is dressed chastely and wears a headpiece of royalty and enlightenment. The Greeks call her agape, or affection. The other woman is bare-breasted and wears the fruit of the vine. The Greeks call her eros, or erotica. A relationship is often begun by eros, but will certainly not endure without agape. Sometimes our choices are simple. Will I have chocolate or vanilla ice cream? The consequences in that case are none. But some decisions do irreparable damage and have dire consequences. Consequences that can't be fixed or changed. These consequences are represented by the genie here, ready to strike if the decision is not made in the best interest of all concerned. In this card, we see vacillation between our conscience, which is usually the hard way, and our passion, which is usually the easy way. Do we do the right thing, or do we do the easy thing? So, along our evolutionary path towards spirit, we come to trial or temptation. In Arcanum 5, the Hierophant teaches us about ethics and values. And in Arcanum 6, the two paths, we are given a choice to use them or not. This card is ruled by Venus. Venus rules the venous system in our bodies, where our blood is literally pressured or squeezed by the walls of the veins to move the blood through the system. We get the word venereal disease from the word Venus. So, other key words that can be used for this card are the arts, love, beauty, affection. Those are the positive aspects of Venus. Sensuality, peer pressure. I'm just a guy or a gal who can't say no. And or too much of a good thing. And those are the negative aspects of Venus. That's where we get that venereal disease from. So, here we see the Lover's card. We have the woman standing in front of the tree of knowledge, and we have the man standing in front of the tree of life here. We have the same angel, and yet this card does not really relay that much of a choice visual, does it, to me, temptation. It's more about duality or simply just the lovers, as what they call the card. Over here, definitely the lovers. We have, two people obviously having a good time in the lily field. And that card is also called the lovers. So our card here has really more to do with choice and dilemma and vacillation and really grappling with our conscience, doing the right thing. And usually when it comes up in a reading, it usually has to do with someone thinking about having an affair. That's usually what it's about.
Oh, that would fit, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, any questions or comments about this before I move on?
I really like our part.
I do too. I do too. It has more to say, doesn't it? Okay.
tarot teacher I first had a way of looking at this. Sometimes this card shows up in readings when people are not engaged in relationship or even thinking about one. And he would look at it on the most general, quote, highest level or broadest perspective as that which you desire most, or you're a lover of the world right
Sure.
now. That energy is
A love
predominant.
energy, yeah.
I liked that.
I like that too. And thank you for that input. And there's always these wonderful little interpretations or big interpretations people have around these cards. And really, all of them are valid. If it's valid to you, it's valid. It's valid. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's move on to the Conqueror. And you remember that the cards, the major arcanum, are laid out in 3 rows. The top row, the middle row, and the third row from earlier today. Our Conqueror is the last card in the first row. So he's going to be significant in that he has triumphed. He is called the Chariot and Victory in many other decks. The number 7, the Conqueror's number, represents completeness or perfection on the physical plane, as it is expressed in the 7 tones in the musical scale, the 7 days of the week, the 7 physical senses. Now, when I first heard that, I was like, hey, wait a minute, there's only 5 senses. And Christopher said that the ancients considered intuition and thought transference the other 2 senses that we do not use anymore. Well, we use intuition.
We do.
Thought transference, I'm not sure that is as common.
People do it all the time.
Many people do it all the time.
Yeah, people do it all the time, they
Yeah.
don't realize it.
They just
Right,
label it, yeah.
right.
I knew you'd say that.
More 7s. More 7s are the 7 chakras, the 7 lower octave planets, the 7 colors in the spectrum, the 7 ancient cultures, the 7 seas, and even the 7 deadly sins. Cells generate at such a rate that every 7 years, the cells in our bodies are completely replaced. Psychologists say that everyone goes through a personality change every 7 years. Maybe that's a good thing. And there's even a 7-year itch in marriages. The number 7 is used over 700 times in the Bible and 54 times alone in the book of Revelations. How did our Conqueror, our hero, get to be so complete, so perfect? He learned his ethics and values and used them correctly. The genie didn't strike, and our Conqueror gets to pass go. In that sense, this is a card of moving on. It's a call to adventure. Along the way, as symbolized by the black and white Sphinx, there will be periods of harmony and periods of discord that will have to be overcome. But our Conqueror has already overcome temptation and conquered the pitfalls and frailties of life. At least he thinks he has. He has gained self-mastery and is now on his way to new and greater heights of achievement, higher learning and philosophy that, as a sage someday, he may impart to others. Ruled by Sagittarius, he's on a spiritual path. Other key words for this card are victory, action, completion, long trips, religion, philosophy, public expression, fair play, honesty, judgment, discernment. All of these qualities are needed to travel the spiritual path. And don't they all sound so Sagittarian? Yes. And I would love to go over these cards with you. We have a very similar expression in the Weight deck. Naturally, it's called the Chariot, but we have a black and we have a white Sphinx. Here we have the symbol of the flying orb. Here we have the Yoni, and also a flying orb, flying orb. And and I've always, when I started reading tarot, I used to, whenever I saw this card, I thought, oh, he's leaving town. He's moving on. And you notice that neither one of these chariots have reins at all, because it's their power and determination and their will that carries them forward. And
Well, he has to get those animals up first.
he's got to get the animals
Yeah.
up. That's
And,
right.
I was mentioning that previous teacher, he had an interpretation of this where since they're often pictured as one black horse, one white horse, you have them partnered so that reconciling opposing factors is one of the reasons the charioteer has success. He can get it all together.
He can get it to work.
Right.
So
go
they're
where
those.
he
So the
wants to
animals
go.
are not fighting each other. They're moving forward, even though they
They're
may have
potential
different.
opposites,
Yeah, they're
right.
essentially opposites, and that's a great insight to that card, Laura.
Could you,
Yes, Mercury.
What is, that symbol, show me the symbol yoni and what does yoni mean? Because as I recall, yoni means the vulva.
Yes, it's
It
a feminine
is.
symbol.
It looks.
This is a completed yoni.
This is a completed yoni.
With the
There you
phallus
go.
in it.
There's a phallus and a yoni there.
Oh, okay.
Right. Which means, again, Laura, that would mean the unification
Exactly.
of dualities
Right.
moving forward. Yeah.
Question.
Yes, Margie.
The animals are laying down in that picture. What does that signify? They're not really moving. The horses, they're just not moving, they're laying down.
They're like sphinxes.
They're not like
It-
they are the Sphinx, yeah.
Yeah.
In the deck that I read, there are also stars on his chest, and in that they're saying he's contemplating, his successes and preparing to move forward. So he's not necessarily gone yet. He's psyching up.
Psyching up, if you will. Right. Right. And, that could be an aspect of the card as well. I mean, we have to think about these
Explain
things
the animals
before.
laying down instead of standing up
It-
as they should be.
There you go. They're not quite moving out yet. Yes, Eva.
I was thinking the card is victory, which means you've accomplished something, and it's the last card in that line.
Exactly.
So maybe they're laying down because they accomplished what they did. He's not going forward. He's not charging. He's done.
He's taking a break.
Yeah,
He's taking a
yes,
break
yeah.
after succeeding at something,
Yeah,
perhaps.
that would seem to
Right.
interpret why he's not having reins. He's not.
Exactly.
But he's there.
You know what I love about this exchange and why I put these 3 different cards up here, and we'll talk about the last one in a minute, is that I've got you all looking at this symbolism, trying to figure out what it means. And that's exactly what reading tarot is all about.
Yeah, it's true.
It really is. So just look at the symbolism and try to figure out something based on that.
And another completion sign in our Egyptian card is the triangle atop the circle, atop the square
Exactly.
on his staff.
Exactly. And I was just going to point that out. And what Laura's talking about here is the square, and we have the circle and the triangle. And that symbolizes the 3
Physical.
the physical, the astral, and the spiritual. Right. That somehow he has conquered, on some level he has conquered those. Now I love this one over here. This is the Halloween deck. It's called the Chariot. I love the Halloween deck. Have any of you ever seen the Halloween deck?
No.
Well, it's taken right after the Weight deck. But instead of, swords and the usual pentacles, you have pumpkins and cats and bats and ghosts and things. And it's really fun. And I use them sometimes when I go to Halloween parties. I'll carry a basket around with tarot cards, and I'll just have people pull a card, and then I'll talk to them about it, and they're just like thrilled. But I often think of the Sagittarian type personality as college students. And there's nothing that a college student would love more than to go on a joyride in a fancy car, right? That's how I look at that card. Okay, so, yes.
Can we go back to card 6? Somebody had a question about the color of the genie and if there's any significance to the color of the genie.
No. There isn't. And the designer of the card is
Well,
over
I looked to see what the significance, if there was
a significance, and there is none.
There's no
But
color. of-
Violet is Mercury, and that's
So that's-
dualistic mind.
Well, there you go.
Yay!
There you go. Let's give a round of applause. Okay. So we've covered the two paths. We've covered the conqueror. Now we're going to go to the
Yeah,
balance.
it's choice, isn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah, sure. God, didn't even know I was doing that.
Arcanum 8, the balance, also called justice. At first impression, the first impression of this card would make one wonder why the balance would correspond to Capricorn in the Brotherhood of Light deck and not Libra as it is in many other decks. After all, the image contains the symbol of Libra, the scales. So I'm going to tell you why here. The signs of both Libra and Virgo are believed to be originally carved out of the image of Astraea. In Greek mythology, Astraea, the virgin goddess of justice, was one of the last immortals to roam the earth alongside humans during the Golden Age. The story goes that she became so disgusted with mankind's penchant for flesh eating, she must have been a vegetarian, weapon making, and general lawlessness that sometime during the Bronze Age, she took refuge in the heavens as the constellation of Virgo. The image of Astraea is still seen today in Arcanum 8 in most tarot card decks, and sometimes as Arcanum 11. She is also seen in courts of law around the Western world with her scales and her sword in hand to weigh and mete out justice. When she is blindfolded to symbolize the rule of law as undeviating and unprejudiced, she is called blind justice. Her scales, the only inanimate object among the signs of the zodiac, came to represent the constellation of Libra, adjoining Virgo in the heavens. Libra, however, rules the sixth house of marriage and partnership. Seventh, of marriage and partnership. Therefore, in Egyptian tarot, Libra corresponds to Isis' unveiled wife and mother. Does that make sense? And I'm
So that was the two combining of the two different cards because this is.
No, she's not there yet.
Yeah.
Just give her a minute.
In Egyptian mythology, it is the goddess Maya, and I want to point out where she is on the card. She's standing right back here. She's got the little feather in her head. It is the goddess Maya who confirms the truth of a deceased confessor on Judgment Day by weighing his heart against her feather. If the deceased heart was equal to or lighter than her feather, he or she was allowed to continue with the arduous trial of attaining a peaceful afterlife. If the deceased's heart was heavier than Mayat's feather, or heavy with sin, the heart was immediately tossed to a monster devourer called Amut, who crouched attentively by the scales. Law and order was enforced in the name of Maya, goddess of truth, morality, and justice. Maya, the female counterpart to Thoth and daughter of Ra, was also a concept in ancient Egypt. She represented the perfect balance that emerged out of chaos at the time of creation. This concept included the idea that any wrongdoing was a threat to the natural order or balance of the universe, thereby threatening Egypt and her people with chaos. It was the pharaoh's solemn duty to prevent chaos by appealing to the gods. Pharaoh did this by building elaborate temples and providing the gods with legions of priests to provide offerings of food and gifts and cleanse their statues in daily ritual. It was also Pharaoh's duty to protect Egypt from her enemies and ensure law and order through a court system, all in the name of Mayat. It was the concept of Mayat, or the balance, that flooded the Nile predictably and to appropriate levels that ensured flourishing crops, that banished disease and pestilence, and maintained perfect order. It is for this reason that this Arcanum 8 corresponds to Capricorn, ruler of the 10th house of administrators, politicians, judges, the courts, a place for discerning the truth, business and careers. And as an interesting aside, the ancient Egyptians equated sin with dishonesty and deceitfulness. The worst sin you could commit was to lie, which is one of the negative characteristics of the Capricorn personality. These sins, however, are usually committed in the form of omission or political correctness in an attempt at diplomacy, which Capricorns are very famous for as well.
They're famous for what?
Diplomacy.
Okay.
Capricorn is also the sign of our darkest and coldest winter months, when many animals are in hibernation, the trees are bare, the roots lie dormant under a thick blanket of snow. It is a time of crystallization and stasis. Therefore, this card can often represent inertia, the exact balance of feeling safe and content in life, where we don't want to learn new things and we don't want to change the way things are. It's hard, after all, to learn new things and take on a new direction. We say, I can't a lot when we mean I won't. We're making a choice not to learn. This balance is represented by the number 8, a double cube of manifestation or earth, 4 plus 4. Also, the number itself appears to be fairly equal on the top and on the bottom. Key words for this card in a reading are balance, equilibrium, justice, complacency, stasis, inflexibility, and issues concerning the courts, law, and order. It can also represent the undeviating law of nature. And in this card, Justice, he's called, in the Waite deck, you can see the very stoic, straight up and down posture that he is in. He's got the sword and the scales. And in the Thoth deck, it looks a little like Madonna to me on stage. I don't know.
That's the deck that I read.
That's it.
And in that deck, it is Libra, and it's
Yeah.
the weighing and balancing, and then needing to make a decision. That's the point of the sword pointed down.
Yeah, okay. Well, you see, there are differences between decks, definitely.
Right.
There's a million decks out there, and you can look at them in about a million different ways.
In that deck, Capricorn is the devil, and I totally get that because my ex-husband was a Capricorn.
You know, one of the undeviating laws of nature is karma. Causes have effects.
Yeah.
And that can be associated with this card.
Mm-hmm. We don't teach karma in the Brotherhood of Light tradition, but certainly you can apply that philosophy
Well, you know what?
to that card.
But it is taught in the, it's just not called karma.
Yeah.
It's just not called karma, yeah.
In every
deny
action, there's
causes
an equal
have
and
effects.
opposing reaction.
Right.
Same thing.
Yeah.
What goes around comes around? What goes
Yes.
around
Comes around, absolutely. We sow what we reap.
Yeah.
Secondhand.
Okay, let's move on to the sage. Oh gosh, I can't keep this thing. The sage, he's also called the hermit in most other decks. Our numbering system is based upon 10, and all numbers are represented by the digits 0 through 9. The number 9 represents the final digit number before new numbers must be represented by a combination of 0 and 9. Because of this, 9 represents a limit, a boundary, or symbol of accumulative attainment. Such expressions like a cat has 9 lives, the whole 9 yards, cloud 9, dressed to the nines, a stitch in time saves 9, are all variations of the highest degree or nth degree, or maximum. 9 equals 3 trinities. 3 times 3 equals 9. And as such has been considered representative of sacred principles taken to their ultimate expression. The Chaldeans, as well as many cultures around the world, both ancient and contemporary, believed 9 to be thrice sacred and symbolic of perfection, balance, and order. This arcanum, Arcanum 9, is the last major arcanum in Egyptian tarot to anchor minor arcana, or the mundane earthly cards. Arcanum 10 does not represent minor arcana, and thus can be seen as a transition into the cards relating to the astral plane. The Sage, or in the weight deck, the Hermit, like number 9, is a little profound too. In the hero's journey, or the fool's journey, he is the enlightened stranger who appears just in the nick of time to lend guidance to a battered and challenged hero. There's an old adage that when the student is ready to learn, the teacher shows up. When we're ready to jump down off that safe place, that stasis of the balance, and take some chances in life, sometimes the sage shows up. We're usually not ready to meet the sage unless we're unhappy, unsuccessful, or have lost our way and used up all of our own resources and don't know where else to turn. We've been humbled, if you will, and now we're ready to learn from a master, or at least one who is willing to guide us in a more favorable direction to get back on track. The sage can come to us in many ways, and sometimes we don't recognize him or her right away, or we're not really receptive to what the sage has to teach us right away. But ultimately, if we put our frustration, bruised feelings, and anger aside and open our hearts and minds to a higher path, we are better off for having made the effort. The sage is Merlin helping Sir Lancelot, Glinda, the good witch, helping Dorothy, and Yoda helping Luke Skywalker. My dad always used to say, if you want some good advice, ask somebody with a little gray hair on their head. You'll notice that our sage has a couple of wrinkles. Very difficult to see on this screen, if at all. But if you look on your card, you will see that he has 2 little wrinkles right there on his cheek. And he's the only character in the deck that does have wrinkles. Everybody else is perfect and beautiful.
He's also hunched over, which is
Oh,
age.
yeah. He shows other signs of age, certainly. The sage also wears the headpiece of a priest and the beard of a pharaoh, indicating that he possesses both political and spiritual wisdom. In the weight deck, he stands on the same precipice as the fool. And here I have the fool up here to show you.
Right. Now, didn't you use, was the fool with the first one?
No, the fool's the last one. That I think I might be confusing you, Mercury, with these comparisons I'm making between the weight deck and the Church of Light deck. Well, we'll be going over the fool either at the end of today or tomorrow. Okay, thank you. His lantern becomes a guiding light to those on the way back up the steep incline. He knows the way because when he was a fool, he fell off the same precipice many times himself. He understands the angst of teenagers. Everything is a drama when you're a teenager because you've never experienced it before. And so you think it's the end of the world. But by the time you're a sage, you've experienced that drama so many times that you know it will all be better in time. In the weight deck, the sage is called the Hermit, and he is said to be a recluse. In Egyptian tarot, he is not a recluse. He is a humanitarian who wanders about in the public square, sharing his insight and lending a hand where it may be needed. Ruled by Aquarius, he is a thinker, inventive, creative, and sometimes argumentative. It is also a card representing groups of people who gather together for charitable benefits, community service, clubs, and associations. The Sage is a card of knowledge, wisdom, and all that is humane. And so, let's have a look at these. I talked about these two fellows. Here's the Hermit in the weight deck, and I look at the Fool, and I see that the Hermit's standing way up here somewhere, and the Fool's on a lower precipice. He's about to fall off. The Sage knows that, and he's got his lantern out to help him come back up again. That's how I always thought about it. You can also see something interesting about our Sage is he wears a square cape, and that square represents Earth, right? So he's walking around amongst people, helping where he can. And he has his little lamp, which guides the way. And he has these two cute little asps. And I believe that these are crowns represent the upper and lower Egypt.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about this one over here with the number 5?
Now this fellow, he's called the Shaman, and this is my third card that I picked to show the wisdom of the Sage. And this is a Southwestern themed deck. And they just call him the Shaman to show that it's a man of wisdom. The Shaman in the community was the fellow everybody went to for advice when they needed counseling. Any questions on this before I go forward?
Well, why is it 9 over here and 5 over here?
Because some of the decks are not numbered even the same way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I like that it's in this central card, there's that 6-pointed star in the middle of the
Middle of the card. Yeah.
And I like the symbolism of the fact that he's shining by his own light. He's guiding. His inner guidance is what informs him. He's not needing to, use external forces to. To me, he represents inner wisdom and that still small voice of God that comes when we get quiet and reflect and all that.
Exactly. And we get inner wisdom from living a long time.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. From experiencing over and over again, right, yes.
I think it's from the interaction with the external world, which is what that square thing. He's covered by, but not completely covered by. And within, illuminated.
And that square is open at the top, too. That the light exudes from the top of that earthly cape.
He's the way shower.
The way shower.
He's not telling.
Right.
He's demonstrating.
He's just guiding and showing, yes. He's guiding and showing.
Yeah.
No, I thought that Laura said that there was like 6 stars. I'm counting 8 stars.
In the
No.
lantern.
No, there's
Oh,
6.
sorry.
1,
Yeah.
2,
Oh,
3,
in
4,
there,
5,
okay, I
6.
was looking at the stars.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's 8 over here. Right. Okay. Let's go on to the wheel. Arcanum 10, also called the Wheel of Fortune, not the TV show. It's also called the Change of Fortune. Oriental tradition teaches us that there are 3 phases to life. 1, growing into the earthly realm, which is explored by major arcanum 1 through 8. 2, living in the earthly realm, which is explored in the Sage, as we have learned from our accumulated experiences. And 3, evolving out of the earthly realm. And here's where we come to Arcanum 10. Arcanum 9, in Arcanum 9, we learn that we can't evolve until we fully embrace living in the earthly realm and learn from our experiences within it. And in Arcanum 10, we are transitioning, metaphorically speaking, from physical energies into astral energies. Even though it is said in Tarot tradition that the second row of tarot cards represents the astral, it is very important to remember that energies, astral energies, are still reflected and experienced in the physical. It is a part of our reality. The message of this card is one thing in life never changes, and that is change itself. Change, whether it comes suddenly or very slowly, is inevitable. Our numbering system takes us to its ultimate number 9. We must now begin to combine single digits to form new numbers. The number 10 is a combination of 1 and 0 and means the beginning of a new cycle, a transition or change for either the positive or the negative. The wheel is ruled by Uranus, the planet of change. In a reading, this card will probably mean sudden and unexpected and usually sudden and unexpected change, and usually brought about by a human element, someone new in the life of the querent. And I kind of stumbled over that, so I'm going to go over it again. The wheel is ruled by Uranus, the planet of change. In a reading, this change will probably be sudden and unexpected, and usually brought about by a human element, someone new in the life of the querent. Whether the change will be for good or not is anybody's guess. But if things are going well, chances are that the change will bring about some challenges. And if things are not going well, then the change will probably bring improvement. The wheel could also represent a sudden and unexpected change of heart, change of mind, or change of attitude. If this card appears in a spread close to a court card, look to that person to bring about the change in some way. In looking at the symbolism, the Sphinx represents perfect man and the passage of time. His javelin is ready to strike this way or that. The evil genie on the left is Typhon. We will meet him again in the Black Magician. The genie on the right is called Hermetic, the good genie. Major Arcanum 10 anchors the 4 10s in the deck that represent the 4 seasons. Again, a symbol of change. With every passing season, there comes a change of weather and our environment. How many times have we looked out the window just after rising on a fall morning, surprised to find winter's first blanket of snow? And that's how suddenly this change comes about, usually. So let's look at the cards. Here again, we have in the weight deck, we have 2 genies also. I don't know their names, and I never knew if there was any distinction made between them. However, we have the 4 fixed signs in this card showing that change is kind of the way things are in the world.
And seasonal, they're the middle of each season.
And yeah, and right, and representing each season exactly.
The fixed signs don't like to change.
Yeah, they don't like to change.
That's why it's disruptive.
That's why we don't like change.
Well, down at on our deck,
Yes.
is that an I or a J? J, Y, J, what is that? An arrow?
Oh, I, Y, and J. Some of these Hebrew and Egyptian letters don't quite translate to English, so they may mean I, Y, or J. We have to substitute those English letters when we see this Hebrew and Egyptian.
And you use
letters.
that in numerology.
And you use it in numerology and in name changes. Right. I like this one. This is sort of a different take on it. It's called the Wheel of Fortune, and it is the triple fates. We have the young girl here spinning the yarn. We have the adult woman weaving the yarn, and we have the old crone cutting the yarn. And it's sort of the idea of fate, that, you know, sometimes a change happens and we just don't expect it, and we don't see it coming, and it's just there. Okay.
What do you make of the elevated figure on our Egyptian card?
Well, this Sphinx, oh, you mean this fellow on top?
Both of them.
Both of them. The Sphinx in Egyptian symbolism means perfect man, because the Sphinx actually is a combination of the 4 fixed signs combined. We have, the head of man being Aquarius, the wings of the eagle being Scorpio, the body of the bull being Taurus, and the paws of a lion. And to combine, they make the perfect man. And it also means the passage of time. Now, this little guy up here, I believe he's Horus.
Oh, okay.
I think that's who that is. And he, oftentimes in Egyptian art, you'll see Horus hovering behind a pharaoh as a sign of protection. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I like this gal. She's on the Wheel of Fortune, and she's blindfolded. So this would be, this is the idea of sort of balancing, trying to keep things stable, but knowing that you're going to fall off that wheel eventually. And things will change. Okay. Let's move on to the Enchantress. She is also called Force, Strength, or Fortitude. She is Arcanum 11. The number system can get a little complicated after this point, offering many combinations for each number, which, if you're interested in the numerology, can be found in the Sacred Tarot by C.C. Zane. But this number, 1 plus 10, means the use of will to bring about change. Remember, the key word for Arcanum 1 is will, and the key word for Arcanum 10 is change. So the use of will to bring about change. According to Egyptian tradition, this translates to the transmuting of energies through directed thinking and induced emotions. Well, that is a mouthful, and what does it mean? Sometimes we don't have control over our circumstances, but we do have control over how we decide to respond to our circumstances. We do have control over our attitude about our situation. Substituting our negative thinking with positive thinking about our situation is referred to in the Church of Light tradition as directed thinking. It is further possible to energize our positive thinking by feeling positive at the same time. I like to induce the emotion first and then do the thinking. That's just the way I work. The more you can feel it, the more you energize your positive thought. Through directed thinking and induced emotions, at the very least, we can feel better about our negative situation. And at the very most, we can change it altogether. This is what people have been doing for millennia in the act of prayer. And essentially, this is the secret mechanism that sometimes makes prayer so effective. And you can say, too, that it is a kind of magic or way to manifest in our lives. Anyone ever read the book The Secret or seen the movie? Mm-hmm. Good, yeah, wonderful. That's what that book is all about, is thinking positively and feeling positively, feeling grateful or gratitude or happiness or joy, while we're saying to ourselves that something is true right now for us.
Is that represented with the hands and the mouth of the lion?
No, that's another aspect of this card that I'm going to talk about next.
So when you say induced emotion, do you mean induced good emotion, gratitude?
Yes,
Or
right.
Gratitude.
Right. You want, as a matter of fact, when we walk around feeling all grumpy and negative and angry and hateful, and we're processing something and we're stomping around, all that stuff creates thought forms too. And it comes back to bite us in where, because it comes around like a boomerang. And so it works both ways. If we walk around all grumpy and negative, we tend to attract negativity in our lives. If we walk around happy and cheerful and positive and feeling grateful for everything in our lives, even our challenges, then it's easier for us to assimilate the knowledge that we learn from our challenges. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but sometimes positive and happy or is different than grateful. Like, I can still be mad and angry, but I can still feel grateful.
That's exactly right.
So
That's
grateful is a better word for me.
Yeah.
For induced emotion.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, grateful is one of those words that may not be positive. It's just a neutral word that has a neutral feeling, I think, that has a lot of energy behind it.
But you could also use induced emotion like mustering your self-confidence so that you gather your
There you
esteem,
go. That's
you
right.
empower
That's
yourself.
right. That's exactly right. When you start hearing yourself saying things like, I'm a loser and I'm so fat or I'm this and that, you have to just think, wait a minute now, you know?
And don't ever ask the universe, what else could go wrong?
Because
Find out.
that's wrong, right, Janet? Because the universe will tell you, right, real quick.
Oh, yeah, show ya, every time.
I have seen, I forget the name of the metaphysician, that had a rendition of negative thoughts, and they actually manifest.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we teach here. They do manifest, right. And sometimes I think negative feelings, this is just my feeling, but I think negative feelings manifest as disease in a person.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things about the fact that the young maiden is able to clasp the hands of, or the jaws of the lion is through induced emotion. It's that internalization of the courage and poise that it takes to be able to face those things that are
Her self-confidence,
and powerful.
right. And it's also acknowledging her animal side with love. And that's really what I was going to talk, what I'll be talking about here in a minute, that it's acknowledging that we have an animal side to us. Boy, do we ever.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. Otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? So this card is ruled by Neptune, the upper octave of Venus, representing universal love and creative imagination. There's that word again. Creative imagination plays an important part in what is attracted to us. We know this by all the books that have been published on the positive effects of visualization, which is a form of creative imagination. Visualization works a lot like affirmation, which we talked about in Veiled Ices. Both processes train the subconscious mind to believe that the desired outcome is true right now. Like affirmation, visualization can be used effectively in every walk of life. It can even make regular mundane chores more enjoyable. I like to practice visualization while weeding, doing the dishes, vacuuming, or God knows, exercising. Here we clearly see that the maiden is holding the jaws of the lion. She appears to be very patient and shows no sign of struggle or fear. The lion represents the animal instincts of our human nature. The maiden, on the other hand, represents the spiritual essence of our human nature. As Veiled Ices demonstrates, we live in both planes at the same time. So this card represents an overcoming of our animal instincts through patience, perseverance, spiritual development, and spiritual force. And again, that inner clarity that we have. Interesting word, force. I've often wondered why this card has been labeled with that word in so many decks. Recently, I came across a tantalizing possibility. The ancient Egyptians used the word netter interchangeably to mean God, godlike, holy, divine, sacred power, strength, force, fortify, mighty, and protect. But according to E.A. Wallace Budge, the truth is that the exact meaning of netter was lost at a very early period in Egyptian history. He goes on to say that the late Dr. Brush defined netter to mean the active power which produces and creates things in regular occurrence, which bestows new life upon them and gives back to them their youthful vigor, which Brush believed to be the core meaning of the Greek word, which I cannot pronounce because it's Greek, and the Latin natura, from which we get our word nature. When I think of this word as representing the force of nature in a struggle between our natural baser animal instincts and our natural spiritual core, it makes more sense to me. The key words for this card are force, spiritual power, fortitude, creative imagination, directed thinking and induced emotions, visualization, prayer, overcoming our animal instincts, the use of will to bring about change, to dream, to hope, highest ideals, and spiritual telepathy. Unfortunately, there is a quirky side to this card. It has a nickname among a small group of people who belong to the Church of Light. It's called the 10% solution card. The reason being that more often than not, this card does not represent spiritual struggle, but represents a con artist or someone who is pulling the wool over the eyes of the querent. For example, a beguiling lover who is not exactly truthful, or an agent who is not forthright with all the information about that used car. In other words, only about 10% is known about the situation. Very tricky. How can this be explained? It must be remembered that this card corresponds to the planet Neptune. Neptune has two keywords: visionary, the side of Neptune that we've already discussed, and the other keyword is illusion, the darker side of Neptune. I always think of Neptune as he is personified in Greek and Roman mythology, a god and denizen of the sea. The ocean is deep and vast, and all that lies beneath it will never be fully known and certainly remains unseen. It must also be remembered that this Arcanum 1 plus 10 represents another cycle of the Magus, and it is, in this card, the Enchantress, that the tricky side of the Magus is fully expressed. So it appears as if our Enchantress is not only capable of subduing the animal side of her own nature, she is also capable of enchanting someone's socks off. In other words for this card are fantasy, illusion, being conned, or being lied to. So it's very interesting because in the weight deck, you can clearly see a relationship between the magician and strength, as it is called in the weight deck. And I could never understand why these were the only two cards that showed a landscape over their heads. You notice the background is exactly the same color. You notice that he's wearing a white gown, she's wearing a white gown. You notice that he has rosebuds all over the place, and she wears rosebuds around her dress. And I noticed these similarities, and I couldn't put it together when I was interpreting the weight deck. But when I interpreted the Brotherhood of Light deck, the relationship all of a sudden made sense. Ironically, in the weight deck, there is no visual representation between the Magus and the Enchantress other than the number 1 plus 10. You're right. In the Egyptian deck, she looks like she's handling the lion quite well, as in the weight deck. In La Forza, which means the strength in Italian, it looks as if she's terrified and really struggling with the strength of her animal nature in that deck. It really challenges her. Yes, Janet?
But, because it's Neptune ruled, she's giving the illusion of control. That doesn't mean that she really feels that she's in control. But she's, by her body language, and body language speaks to animals.
Uh-huh.
Like, you can be terrified, but you use the proper body language and the animal will back off.
Sure.
theoretically.
Yeah, that actually, I have an experience with that where I learned that.
Exactly
Yeah,
right.
terrified
And that could be,
I
and
was-
And you make yourself look bigger, you
Yes.
know, and they'll you know, back off. So, you know, that's part of the whole theme of illusion and trickster and all of
Sure.
that too.
that's right.
Because
So it works right in
it's
just
the
perfectly.
illusion of
Absolutely.
being in control.
Absolutely, it's true. But it also represents the will to make changes in your life, which is, you know, highly spiritual and very much in control. What I would like to ask Vicki, if you know Vicki, or what is the meaning of this double
thinking
eagle?
the same thing.
You know what, and I researched that and I have no idea. I just literally, anything I didn't understand, I just literally translated from the old cards.
Right. Well, you know, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about how eagles mean throughout the deck. Seems to mean the soaring love.
Right.
And there's two of them on her head, so maybe it's double soaring love, or the
He
elevation.
describes them, and I can't remember exactly what it is that he says about
Uh-huh.
Don't eagles mate for life too?
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Mhm.
Yeah.
They mate for life.
And they have the Egyptian hat symbols.
Yes,
One
they
is
do. They have the
female,
crowns of Upper and
Yeah,
Lower
upper and
Egypt
lower,
on their
yeah.
heads. Uh-huh.
which is also like.
But I don't think this means soulmates. I mean, I think sometimes under the influence of Neptune, you can feel like you met your soulmate.
It must be my soulmate.
But I don't think it means the real reunion of soulmates.
No,
at all.
no, I don't think it means the real reunion of soulmates either. But you know what it could mean, though, is Neptune is the higher expression of Venus. So it might mean
And
that double love.
idealized
Yeah,
love.
idealized love, universal love kind of thing.
Or us just aspiring to our divine nature, even if that's an imaginal construct of ours.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hey, Allie,
Yes.
the word netter, is it N-E-D?
N-E-T-E-R.
Oh, N-E-T.
T-E-R. Uh-huh.
Okay, and Aaron here says the Greek word for nature is pronounced phusis.
Phusis?
Yeah.
I better write that down.
I got it here, don't worry.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to the martyr. This is probably one of the most complicated cards in the Major Arcanum and probably one of the saddest. And so we'll be spending a little time on this card. In the days of old, this card symbolized slavery, which for eons was practiced worldwide as a matter of social acceptance. Sadly, slavery still exists today in the shadowy criminal world. A more modern interpretation of this card would be a relationship that enslaves, a habit that enslaves, a belief system that enslaves, or a physical imprisonment of some kind, like prison, an asylum, a sickbed, or a hospital. It can even represent a zoo, any place where captivity is involved. It could also mean imprisonment from a sense of tradition or economic or socio-political oppression. The martyr is ruled by Pisces, the sign of slavery, crime, expiration, sacrifice, disappointments, substance abuse, and secret sorrows. The key phrase for Pisces is, I believe. We touched upon this a little bit in the Hierophant, simply because that card represents laws and ethics and rules and religion. But we're going to talk about belief systems in this card a lot because it has to do with believing. And there is nothing on this earth more powerful than a belief system. The age of Pisces, the age of I believe, began at the dawn of Christianity and is characterized by the birth of powerful and influential faiths. Human beings are not only hardwired to find a connection with the divine, as we talked about in the Hierophant, they are also hardwired to try to figure out where they fit in society. We all want to identify with something. I'm a watercolorist, and when I first began to learn to paint, one of my biggest issues was, what style shall I try to achieve? Will I express through realism, impressionism, futurism, symbolism, cubism, expressionism, postmodernism, and the list of isms go on and on. The point is, I wanted to identify with an ism. I looked up ism in the dictionary. There are 4 reasons why ism becomes a suffix. The first is to show an act or practice, like criticism or plagiarism. The second is to show a state or abnormal condition, like alcoholism. The third is to show a characteristic or trait, as in colloquialism. But its last definition that pertains to Arcanum 12. And in this last definition, ism is added to words that pertain to doctrine, theory, or cult, like Buddhism or occultism, or adherence to a system or a class of principles, as in pacifism. Under this category, there are many isms that are out there today, and they are hot buttons. Racism, capitalism, socialism, fascism, communism, radicalism, environmentalism, vegetarianism, liberalism, and conservatism. These are, of course, there are, of course, both good and bad aspects of many isms, but suffice it to say that isms are belief systems that have been the captors of true believers, those people who have become, so to speak, hung up, like the martyr, in some way around them. It's easy to do, and it's human to do. The opposite of being hung up, of course, is falling down. Losing faith in an ism can be devastating. Imagine our hanged man falling out of his tree, on his head. All of a sudden, feelings of betrayal, remorse, and loss wash into one's comfort zone. And for a time, there is a wandering, lost feeling until one finds another tree. From very early on in Christianity, the fish of Pisces have been used as a symbol of Christ. Primarily, it was probably because Christ heralded the dawn of the age of Pisces, when the constellation of Pisces became the backdrop of the rising sun at the vernal equinox. Both the sign of Pisces and ultimately Christ became symbols of sacrifice for the benefit of mankind. Ruled by Jupiter, Pisceans too have a devotion to mankind that far exceeds that of any other sign. Pisceans are capable of incredible compassion, limitless charity, and sacrifice in the name of bettering mankind. They are the ones that will join the Peace Corps, donate a kidney, or work to the bone on behalf of others. Co-ruled by Neptune, this card can symbolize addiction to escape the constant sense of worry, to relieve the tensions of oversensitivity, or to discover a spiritual path. There is certainly a correlation between addiction and the Jupiterian urge to connect with the divine. Alcoholics Anonymous recognizes this concept, and therefore, one of the first signs in the 12-step program is the acknowledgement of spirit, or one's higher power. However, it is also true that outside of support groups, many have lost their addictions when they found their God. When this card is reversed, and it is one of only 2 in the major arcanum that have a different meaning when it is reversed in Egyptian tarot, it means that through personal sacrifice, mana from heaven is received and reward is given. The money that flows out from the hands of our hanged man now flows into his hands when the card is reversed. Keywords that could be applied for this card are many. Sacrifice, atonement, secret sorrows, enslavement of some kind, addiction, trapped by a belief system, loss of a belief system, struggling for faith, struggling within faith, loss of faith, physical or emotional dissipation, loss of money, loss of hope, despair, suspension, delay, hung up on something or someone, and worry. Reversed, reward and blessings as a result of sacrifice, fulfillment, money coming your way, hope, faith, charity, and liberation. So I would just like to say, when we find that our belief systems, our isms, don't always jive with each other, the important thing to remember is when we don't see eye to eye, it's important to still walk hand in hand. Yes.
I think that the hangman in the 12 deck also it shows like a grid at the bottom, and he's hanging upside down, in this. And I think it represents also seeing things suddenly from a very different perspective. It's like that nasty reality hit.
Yes,
When
right.
you had this nice little bubble, and all of a sudden you find out he's not really like that at all.
Well, isn't that a belief system now that we have somebody about somebody, I can remember when I just thought my dad was God when I was a kid. I thought my dad could do no harm. And somewhere around the age of 13, I realized, geez, he's just a human being. He makes a lot of mistakes. And
What a jerk, huh?
And then I was like, holy smokes, I have to relearn this guy all over again. Yes, Barb.
The symbology of the crossed legs. Two of them got crossed.
Oh, right, and that shows up again as obstacles. These are challenges that we have to face.
It's that same sulfur.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And since this is the only card, this is the only card that's one of two cards that's reversed in the Major Arcanum. I would like to talk about reversals right now. In the Brotherhood of Light tradition, reversals do not apply when it comes to the Major Arcanum. It means that right side up, the card is fully expressed. Reverse, that same energy is not fully expressed. Reverse, that same energy is not fully expressed. And that pertains to both the majors and the minors. Now, when we get into the court cards and the horsemen, that story changes a little bit. There are only two cards in the Major Arcana that have different meanings when they are reversed. This is one of them, the Martyr. The other one is the Materialist Spiritualist, which is the name of our fool, Mercury. And the material, he not only has a different definition, he has a different name, and he has a different number. Those are the only two cards. We have 10 minutes more to go before we have a break, and I see some of you are standing up and stretching. But we'll be ready in about 10 minutes, if that's okay. I need to get through some of these. Okay, so let's look at these cards for a minute. I want to point out, too, that the grapes here are dissipating. They're dripping their blood, and the money is falling from his hands. We see the Pisces tie right here, which is how we symbolize enslavement. Barb pointed out that, yes, his feet or his legs are crossed to show obstacles that must be faced. Now, when the card is flipped right side up, the money is coming into the hands, and the juice is falling back and receiving, the elixirs of life. In the weight deck, he hangs from a tree, and his hands are tied behind his back. He has the same crossed legs, and he has a halo showing that there are some instances where he can gain great fulfillment from his sacrifice. This is an Egyptian deck of some sort, and I'm not sure what that language is or what it means, but it might mean like the slave And clearly, this shows the symbolism of slavery. This is how slavery is shown in Egyptian art, where the pharaoh is striking down the slave, and he usually has him by his hair.
It's kind of funny that it's called the hangman card, but there's nothing hanging in that card.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing hanging in the
Yeah, just the concept.
It's just a concept, yeah. Let's talk about the Reaper. Arcanum 13, the Reaper, also called Death or Transformation in many cards. This morning I mentioned that the earliest hand-painted decks available to historians came from Renaissance Italy and were used to play a game called Tarocchi by the upper classes. If historians and collectors are lucky enough to find one of these decks today, in most instances, several of the cards will be predictably missing. The Reaper or Death card would certainly be one of those cards, as well as the Black Magician or Devil, or the Lightning, or as it's called, the Tower cards. The reason for this is that the ladies of the court were to be protected from these fearful images. And I'd like to say that the fearful images are really the best part of tarot, because that's where we really learn things. If we're looking at happy cards, we're not looking at too much that we don't already know. We have to learn from our negative influences in life often. But this card is not to be feared. A second look at the symbolism of the Reaper will show that this card has more to do with new life than death. The skeleton has a smile on his face, and there is a rainbow behind him, hearkening brighter days ahead. The more gruesome images of severed heads, hands, and feet symbolize that with the passage of time, our thoughts, our heads, our works, our hands, and our understanding, our feet, will all change. Change is often uncomfortable and unpleasant. No one really enjoys change. Some people are better at adapting to change than others, but most people resist it. This card in a reading sends a message that it's time to let go and start over, or that the querent has already begun to do so. Otto Rank, Austrian psychoanalyst, writer, teacher, and close colleague of Sigmund Freud, wrote, quote, "There seems to be a spiritual law whereby nothing can wholly be won or enjoyed without something being given up or sacrificed for it." Ah, sacrifice. That makes us think of the martyr, doesn't it? We know he symbolizes sacrifice. His astrological sign, though, is Pisces, the sign of winter and the end of the year. The Reaper, on the other hand, is ruled by Aries, the sign of spring and the promise of sunnier days ahead. So I always like to think of this card as the raking and cleaning we must do to rid our yards from winter's old growth, dead growth, in order to clear the way for the new growth that will surely issue forth. Maybe instead of being called the Reaper, he could be called the Raker. A word of caution about the Reaper. First rule of ethics in reading tarot. Tarot readers never, 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 never predict death in a reading. Anyway, one challenging card is not indicative of death. If the Reaper, the Tower, and the Martyr were all in the same reading, then you might suspect death. But never, never, never predict it. One of your handouts is my personal code of ethics, and you won't see this on there. So I want you to just ingrain it, etch it on the inside of your eyeballs or something, and put it in your own ethics. It is irresponsible predicting death and may pave the way for self-fulfilled prophecy. Furthermore, even when death seems imminent, it is sometimes miraculously escaped. Do you remember a number of years ago when that baby carriage somehow found its way onto a train track in Australia, and that baby survived? It was amazing. And how many times have people died in airplanes? And everybody dies except one little 12-year-old or something. It happens all the time. Death, in fact, cannot be predicted in any form of divination. I don't care if it's palmistry, astrology, pick-up sticks, whatever it is. Can't be done. The key words and phrases associated with the Reaper are transformation, great change, a sacrifice of some kind or something for the fulfillment of another. Know when to let go and start over. Their perpetual destruction and rebirth of all forms of life. New cycle, new life, new thought. So here we see in the weight deck the idea of the king is dead, long live the king. There's a recycling, a rebirth syndrome there. In the death, we see the endless snake that Laura was talking about earlier as a sign of rejuvenation or eternity or revolving life. And in our deck, what I love is the idea that these heads and feet look as if almost they're planted, don't they? They look as if they're planted. And the grass is green. It's springtime. It's Aries. So you can see that idea of new growth in this card as symbolized not only by the green grass, but by the rainbow in the heavens. So I think this is a really good place for us to stop for a half-hour break. So we'll see you all back in a half hour for our last hour of the day. And I can see I'm just hammering you.